All right, everyone, I'm excited to introduce my next guest, Emmy award-winning writer and producer. He's written for Silver Spoons, The Carol Burnett Show, Smothers Brothers Show, Flow, Amen, and so much more. Welcome to the show, Bob Isles. Hello, sir.
Good to be here, Jeff. Thanks so much.
I would have listed off all your credits, but we didn't want to fill up the whole episode just introducing you. What are the origins of your career, but even like what got you interested in entertainment, TV? What was the bug that sparked you? What was those early things as a kid that led you on this path?
I grew up, as a first generation on TV. We had this funky black and white TV. I would see stuff like the Mickey Mouse Club and things like that. Sheriff John's Lunch Brigade, which is an afternoon cartoon show, and he'd play our gang comedy, Laurel and Hardy. We got the bug at that point. They just said, how do I get inside that TV? I'm sure a million other kids were equally enamored by the TV machine, but I stuck with it. So my dad liked stuff like Ernie Kovacs and Steve Allen, so we'd watch a lot of comedies. I bought Mad Magazine. Some guy introduced me to Mad Magazine, so that definitely made an impact. But I didn't think about making that a career necessarily. Even though I lived in LA, I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to do. How would I get into this business? Eventually, I went to USC, started working on the radio station there, which was called KUSC. I actually had a big signal. My partner and I, Jim Stein, we had a comedy radio show, sort of like Howard Stern, but without the raunchiness. Just kind of freewheeling kind of show. We had characters, and either ones that we made up or live ones. We had guests like Steve Allen and Joey Bishop and people like that. So anyway, from that we got Stein found out some guy was teaching a class in TV writing at USC, a producer named Digby Wolf. So we got into the class. He also likewise had guest speakers in his class. It was not very big class, maybe 25 or 30 people were in it. Eventually, he was producing a special for Tennessee Ernie Ford. I don't know if anybody remembers him at all or heard of him, but he's kind of this hillbilly guy with a big, deep voice, singing voice. It was sort of a predating Jim Neighbors. He said that he could hire a couple of student writers. So there was sort of like a small competition. So we researched Ernie Ford, wrote a monologue for Ernie Ford. And I think maybe one other person did it in the class. So we gave it to Digby, and then it was Christmas vacation. So we never heard anything back. So during the and we knew that the show would be starting early in January. I found his name, his phone number in the phone book. I mean, how many Digby Wolves are there? But in those days, everybody's name was in the phone book. So I called him up and I said, hey, what's going on with that Ernie Ford thing and all that? So he said the words that started my whole career. He said, "You're hired."
That's amazing.
So we went to work on the Tennessee Ernie Ford special in following January, which was 71, by the way. So anyways, keeping score. And the weird thing was there was only two other writers, aside from Digby, who also would write. One of them was a guy named Tom Cook, spelled Koch. I recognized him right away. He's a Mad Magazine writer. He did some classic Mad Magazine stuff. He also worked for Bob and Ray, the radio team. So that was pretty wild. We didn't really know what we were doing. And then luckily, nobody else kind of knew what they wanted to do with this special. I mean, we took a trip to Disneyland and walked around. That was kind of weird, seeing the backstage at Disneyland, looking for venues or what could Ernie do. And then that got scrapped with just a show that was done at NBC, which is right across the street. And by the way, first time I went over to NBC, first people I ran into were Ozzie and Harriet, who were coming out of the building as I was going in. I said, wow, I'm in show business. And then Diane Carroll was a guest star on Danny Thomas and the Smothers Brothers. I think Arlene Galanka from the Andy Griffith Show. So we were right in the middle of showbiz. We were just kind of observing more than anything, such newbies. It was a great experience. And the show was done I think it was shot in about a month. I mean, we were there for about a month or so. The whole experience, we made $700 a piece, which at the time was $7 million. But we got writing credit at the end of the show. So we weren't members of the Writers Guild yet. That kind of got things going. It took a while, but we wrote for comedians, and over the next year and a half or so, we got a quiz show, writing questions on some quiz show, which is awful. Finally, Digby again, same guy that was teaching the class, he hired us onto a Bill Cosby. It was a variety show for CBS. It was a bunch of big team of writers. And again, we were like these. We weren't given writer credit or anything. We were just called researchers, because so they could have us on the show, but not pay us writer money, just to see how we would do. So eventually, we ended up writing monologues for Cosby. I remember one time Cosby, while we were doing that show, Cosby went on the Dick Cavett show. In the course of the discussion, he said, "Oh, these two young writers are writing my monologues." And Cavett said, "Well, really, what are their names?" And Cosby said, "Oh, I can't tell you because they're not in the Writers Guild." We were that close to national fame. Eventually, we got kicked up to writerhood on that show. We had to join the Writers Guild. Meanwhile, all these other old school writers on the show, Cosby really didn't like their stuff. It was too jokey for him. And the real executive producer of the show, George Schroder, who was doing Laugh-In, and or had done Laugh. I'm not sure if he was still working on Laugh-In while we were doing that show, but so they couldn't have been more different. Cosby and Schroder, what stuff that Cosby does and did what Schroder likes, just like the hard, jokey stuff. Since we were writing monologues for Cosby, then we were good. We became migrant farm writers after that. We kind of went from show to show to show after that. Luckily, we got agents at William Morris, one of whom was Mike Ovitz, who at the time was just a 25-year-old guy, a little bit older than us maybe, and he hadn't become, but already he was very effective, and he really helped us a lot, got us jobs and stuff. But he soon became this giant figure in show business, started CAA and stuff like that. But he got us on the Carol Burnett Show eventually. We created a show starring Richard Castellano that got on. So we did a lot of, I'm jumping around a little bit, but that's kind of how everything started. We were lucky to just keep going for 30 years, a long time. And then eventually I split up with Stein, my partner, and then working the last 10 years of the career on my own. You know, we encountered a lot of people, made a lot of fun. I wrote a book that the publisher now has called Funny as Money, 39 Stories about how I made a ton of money in writing TV comedies. That has all this kind of crazy stuff laid out of the people we met, hung out with.
All right.
So anyway, that's kind of the overview.
No, that's great. That's awesome. So let's go back to the Stein and Isles radio show. How did you mention like guests like Steve Allen?
Yeah.
How did you get like such big name guests, or were they not as big names yet? Or I'm not sure like the time frame in my head going back.
Weirdly enough, Stein was from a wealthy. I was not. Stein was from a wealthy family in Chicago, or at least wealthier than me or mine were. He went to a school called New Trier, which is pretty renowned in the Chicago suburb. Like Anne Margaret went there. A lot of people went to that school. He was able to get people like Louis Armstrong on that when he was doing the radio work in his high school in Chicago. So when I met up with him, he was doing a serious talk show at KUSC, and I sat in one time and was screwing around. So then we started doing a comedy show rather than a straight interview show. He knew ways to find these celebrities, and I think he mostly did that. He got in touch with like Regis Philbin and Steve Allen, someone we just interviewed on the phone. The Joey Bishop thing, Joey agreed to have us come down to his office at ABC. He was, at that time, this is like 70 or so. At that time, he was doing a show on ABC opposite Johnny Carson. We went down to his office at ABC, and it was in Los Feliz area of Los Angeles. And we brought an engineer with us with a little reel-to-reel tape recorder and stuff. What we wanted to do is kind of incorporate it into our show. So when the tape started, we were kind of doing voices, and I was doing like a Regis bit. Oh, you'll never guess what kind of guest we have on the show, Mr. Stein, and stuff like that. And then Joey's kind of sitting there, stone faced while we're doing this stuff. So finally, Stein whispered to me, like, don't, let's stop doing the bits or something like that. And Joey saw that he was conferring with me, and he said, stop the tape. First of all, he didn't think we were funny. Second of all, he was concerned that we would edit the stuff and make him look bad on our radio show. This guy had a network TV show, and he was worried about us, our college radio show. And I was thinking to myself, oh, you're so right. He wasn't like my favorite Rat Packer. So then we started doing a straight interview with the guy. Like, how'd you get started and stuff like that. And then he finally said, let's have some fun. And all of a sudden, he put a big damper on everything. And then he said, oh, let's have some fun. So he started doing impressions and stuff. he was just a jerk. So we were going, yeah, that's good. I mean, we didn't know what the hell to say that we weren't going to get yelled at or something. So finally we said, okay, well, thank you, Joey. Or he also maybe he had to go and do his show or something. I don't know. But anyway, that was our Joey Bishop story. And we had Harry Shearer on a number of times. You know, Harry's major voice on The Simpsons now, but at the time he was doing a show called The Credibility Gap, a radio show. It was a satirical news show. So we invited them on when they were mocking us and making fun of us. Anybody, we befriended Harry, so we had him on a number of times. We were just brazen, you know, we were just trying to make a name for ourselves, something, or we weren't, I guess we probably figured we'll do some radio show somewhere, you know, we were hoping, but we didn't want to go to, you know, like Wheeling, West Virginia or something, which is the normal route of, you know, going to small stations and working your way back up to LA. We were already in LA. Like I said, so the Digby Wolf thing kind of veered us into TV writing, eventually aged out of our college radio show. So then we were on to writing for TV. I always loved working on radio. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was great. I really loved doing that. It was one of the things I always wanted to do when I was a kid. I would listen to disc jockeys and then eventually talk radio. And I said, God, I'd love to do all that. So we got to do that at KUSC. And we had a sizable audience, mostly 15-year-old boys. There was not like there was audience research or we didn't really know how many people are listening or what, but people that would come down to watch us or write fan letters were mostly these teenagers. I guess they thought we were like these wacky adults or something. I don't know.
Okay, so all right, so Digby Wolf kind of gives you your first job.
Yeah, you're hired. Yeah.
He's a co-creator of Laugh-In with George Schlatter?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, it's a little fuzzy because there's also, I think there were some Canadian guys who were making some claims about having kind of started it. Blind Beard, Alan Blind. I worked for both of them eventually, but Alan Blind, both of them are goners now, as is Digby. But they were involved too at the beginnings, but mainly George and Digby were kind of the honchos there. That was a pretty major program at that time, basically Saturday Night Live, but it was like, I think it was on Mondays though. And it wasn't live. But other than that, it was basically kind of breaking the barriers, along with the Smothers Brothers late 60s show, which was fantastic.
So when you were at the Bill Cosby Variety Show, he's coming off I Spy, the original Bill Cosby show. So yeah, there's a lot of heat on Bill Cosby at this point. Good heat.
Well,
do you have any, was there any cool stories from working there other than him almost mentioning your name?
Well, yeah, there was a big feud between him and Slaughter almost immediately, like of what the tone of the show would be. The very first episode, I mean, I don't think we had anything in the script, but we went to this big table reading, and the first people I see there, oh, well, actually, even before the table reading, I'm thinking about it. Cosby said, a few of the writers were hanging around. Cosby said, give me some paper and one of those, pointing to a typewriter, because he didn't like the script and he was going to presumably rewrite it or something. I don't know. We were just observing. Anyway, the first two guests were Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier, so that was pretty insane. So there they were sitting at the table eventually for the table reading. Ah, damn, this is amazing. I don't remember what they did on the show or if they did bits or what, or Cosby just kind of interviewed him or something, but they were doing a movie with Cosby. I forget the name of it. Buck and the Preacher, I think that was it, which I believe Poitier was directing. So that's pretty awesome. And then another time we get a call in our office to come up to the rehearsal hall because Cosby and Peter Sellers wanted to see us. Peter Sellers was a guest. This was like 10 shows in or 15 shows in. And we had written a bit about, it was like an English Jive dictionary kind of thing. I forget the exact nature of the bit. Cosby and Peter Sellers, since we wrote the sketch, called us upstairs to explain a couple of lines or something. In this, it's like, man, I was like talking about intimidating Mr. Peter Sellers, for God's sake. I guess we were sufficiently explained what we were doing, and they were fine. So they dismissed us. It was pretty amazing that we were in this whole mix. Pat McCormick was on the show, a writer on the show. The big Pat McCormick is a great guy, just hilarious guy. He had a drinking problem at that time. Mainly, another time Groucho was a guest on the show toward the end. I guess Cosby was a big fan of Groucho. And I remember the little wizened old guy at that time. He had this wacky girlfriend. Groucho was there. They were singing some stuff around the piano. It was like some of the weird old songs that Groucho knew. And Cosby was talking to him. And I noticed Groucho had his cigar, but it was in cellophane. So like the girlfriend wouldn't let him actually light it up or anything. She was hanging around the office like mad that Edward G. Robinson is going to get the Special Academy Award instead of Groucho, and just oddball stuff there. It was Groucho, so that was awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Marvin Hamlisch was his accompanist. I think it's pre-Sting, but I'd heard of the guy. I knew who he was. One thing after another.
Legendary name after legendary name. That's
Yeah, and then another big one was Mark. Why do I forget? The guy who won like 7 gold medals in the Olympics, the swimmer. He all of a sudden showed up. I was watching the Olympics, a few days before, and then all of a sudden he's there in the office as a guest on the show. That was that kind of thing, one after another. And Quincy Jones was like the music director. Sergio Aragonés, another Mad magazine guy, he did like some artwork for the titles or whatever, interstitial stuff. So pretty amazing.
It's amazing. I mean, how many legends you were surrounded by. One of your early writing credits was on the Tom Smothers Organic Prime Time Space Ride.
Oh, yeah.
Notably writing with Bob Einstein and Steve
Right.
Martin.
We knew one of the producers of that. So I think he was another guest lecturer at USC that we met. Somehow we got hired on there, probably from Ovitz, I don't remember. But again, one of those kind of amorphous things, like what are we supposed to do? And the guys we were working who were kind of running it weren't that supportive. But yeah, I remember one early on in the office, and in comes Steve Martin. I was a big fan of his already. He wasn't how well known he was at that time. I just remember one thing about it. I was wearing these extremely short shorts. I don't know what the hell that was about. It was kind of warm days. I didn't see him much after that. I think he maybe just sent in stuff occasionally or something. And Einstein, probably the first time I met Einstein, who it also is, because he would be on he was Officer Judy on the Smothers Brothers show. And he also would do a lot of bits on Steve Allen, just put on bits. And he was really good at that, where he would just keep that straight face. And he would do that in the office, like some delivery guy came in, he was giving that guy a hard time, and he just would not get off. The guy wasn't sure if he was serious or not. I forget what was going on, but it was hilarious. And he became a pretty good friend of ours, Einstein. We worked on several shows for him, and yeah, he was a very nice guy. Could be difficult to work for, but he was a nice guy. And Martin, I know we did work with Steve Martin as a writer in another show for Dick Van Dyke called Van Dyke and Company. It was kind of a pilot for a show that did go on. We were committed to doing something else, but that was mid-70s. But Steve was a writer on that show. And one time I remember Einstein, it was Rosh Hashanah or where
Yom Kippur.
It's a big Jewish high holiday. Yeah, it might have been Yom Kippur. The thing was that Einstein, it was a hard, but he wanted all the Goy writers to still come in and work, but the Jewish writers or whoever could stay home and go to temple or whatever. So my partner Stein, he took the day off. But I was there with Steve Martin and a guy named George Burdett. We were like the non-Jewish writers on the show. So I had lunch with these guys, with Steve Martin, and around the corner from the studio. So that was pretty cool. Got to know Steve Martin a little bit. But then almost not long after that, he skyrocketed with the King Tut stuff and all that. And he never looked back. Then he became a big movie star. Later on, we were working on late 70s. We were working on a Dick Clark live show. It's called Dick Clark's Live. And we were sitting at the NBC commissary, and there comes Steve Martin. I guess he was doing the Tonight Show or something. He recognized us, and he said, "Oh, congratulations! We had just won an Emmy for the Carol Burnett Show." We said, "Hey, man, we really want you to do the show." We're trying our best. So he kind of shined us on, and he walked on, because by that time he was too big, but at least he was friendly. I don't know if he knows me anymore. I haven't talked to him since then. That was pretty amazing.
Was Van Dyke and Company, was that after the Dick Van Dyke Show? Because that was Mary Tyler Moore, Carl Reiner as well, right? Or
no, it was I mean, after the classic Dick Van Dyke Show, which was early '60s, I think he did some iterations of that. I don't know, remember if Mary Tyler Moore and Reiner were involved in those or not, but I don't remember Reiner or Mary Tyler Moore being on this Van Dyke. Maybe on the series they were. On the pilot, I don't believe they were. But we left after that pilot. We had created a show called Joe and Sons with Richard Castellano. We went to go work on that. We weren't involved in the series, but the pilot did get a Emmy nomination, but we didn't win, but for writing, but we didn't win that. But I believe the series did after we left.
You were also involved in Lily Tomlin's first special. I assume this is part of the laughing connections you had since she was on.
Yeah, that all helped. I mean, I believe I think Ovitz got us that job. I mean, at that point, Stein was about ready to go to law school, kind of picking up a few things here and there, but he was kind of losing confidence in the whole writing career. But then all of a sudden, I believe it was Ovitz, our agent, called us about going down to meet on this Lily Tomlin special, which was for CBS. So we met with her manager. I'm not sure if we met with Herb Sargent. He was the head writer. It was almost like the fix was in. We didn't have to sweat that too much.
Was Lorne Michaels part of that?
Yes, he was. He wasn't a head writer, but he was. I think I saw later that he had a producer credit. When we met him there, he was like another writer, as far as I could tell. Again, we were still newbies. We were still low on the totem pole. There's kind of a big staff of writers. And of course, Jane Wagner and Lily, and I don't know how much Lorne was involved in her. They wrote the bulk of the show, which I didn't think was that funny myself at the time, but whatever. It won the Emmy for writing Emmy. Yeah, Lorne was there. He seemed like an okay guy at that time. When it came to when Saturday Night Live, I think they pitched it to Saturday Night Live, which is like a couple of years later, maybe. And he turned us down. Oh, fuck you, Lorne Michaels. I don't know if he was that familiar with maybe stuff we wrote on the show that didn't get on that he wasn't that happy with. I don't remember. And we never found out much about it. But he didn't seem to be a honcho. He just seemed to be like another writer. Come and say hello once in a while. So, he kind of bantered back and forth, but then didn't work with him too much.
Another classic sitcom that you wrote on, Sanford and Son. Yeah,
that was a weird one because when I first got a call not from Ovitz, but another William Morris agent, probably who was covered NBC, he said, call up Aaron Rubin at Sanford and Son, because apparently Rubin was a fan of KUSC. So we assumed, oh God, he listened to our show. He wanted us to work on Sanford and Son. So that, however, KUSC came up in pitching us to him, that sparked his attention. So he was intrigued, but it turned out he listened to classical music shows. He didn't listen to, I don't think he listened to our show or any of the other, I don't know how many other comedy shows were on KUSC. It was mostly either classical music, us, or rock and roll. There wasn't much else. I talked to him and he was kind of giving me the rundown of what kind of stuff they were looking for or whatever. I mean, again, this is something where you had no idea about how to write a sitcom or what pitch. So we brainstormed ideas at Stein's house. We knew we would have to go in and pitch story ideas to the guy. So one idea that we came up with was Bubba, which is one of Fred's friends. He sees Lamont and Rollo. Lamont was the son of Sanford and Son, and Rollo was his friend. Saw them going into what turned out to be a gay bar. The backstory being that Lamont and Rollo didn't know anything about. They didn't know there was a gay bar. They just were looking for a bar. They were out on the town or whatever. Bubba reports that to Fred, and so Fred's freaking out that his son may be gay. Now this was 1973, so people were not woke at that point. And we even told Aaron Rubin, I said, well, we'll be tasteful about it. We were sensitive to what kind of jokes we would do. We didn't do a bunch of gay jokes and stuff like that. So anyway, we wrote the script. I don't think it was like so great. He rewrote the hell out of it. And it became, it was eventually called Lamont, Is That You? Because there was a big famous play about Norman, Is That You? It was a lot of the farcical stuff. Fred's trying to grill Lamont about, without saying it directly. And it's sounding like Lamont maybe gay, and then he has to see a doctor, and so anyway, it's kind of dumb at even looking at it now. But the thing was, they had a lot of protests when that show came on. there was a lot of protesting from the gay community about airing of that show. So it was left off of the syndication for a long time. Now it's in the mix again, but at that time, and definitely wasn't our intention. We were just trying to come idea. So eventually, Ruben would give us he would give us scripts to write, give us premises. We didn't really have to invent them. We were just novices, so we were trying our best to kind of replicate that kind of writing, just total on-the-job training. So of course he rewrote everything, and it was okay. We ended up doing like 2 or 3 other episodes after that one. So he was impressed at that was the very first thing we pitched to him, that gay bar thing, and he bought it almost immediately. So we were lucky there.
Right. Back then it was kind of real cutting edge. Today it would just be like, no one would even think twice about it.
Probably not. And they'd probably do it in a different way or something, because it was just feeding on old views of these old timers have these views about homosexuality and stuff. So that was definitely a sign of those times. I was surprised that there was protests and stuff like that. So obviously there was big awareness even at that point. I guess it was a little bit after the Stone Ridge, whatever that was called, in New York, where there were more awareness of that gay community and stuff. I don't know how much Ruben knew about that or cared, or NBC. I'm sure they were surprised too. Such a controversy. Big ratings though. I mean, not specifically our episode, but Sanford and Son was major hit show.
Well, it had a great theme song, so that helped out.
Yeah, it was great.
You worked with Norman Lear a couple times, One Day at a Time, Fernwood Tonight, or at least on Norman Lear projects.
Yeah.
Fernwood Tonight with Martin Mull and Fred Willard, which became America Tonight. And that's another one that you received an Emmy nomination for.
Right.
How was it working? I mean, Martin Mull and Fred Willard, 2 of the funniest people ever.
Mm-hmm.
How was that experience?
That was great. That was a great experience, because it was at least kind of like along the lines of the kind of comedy we like to do. I mean, other shows that we were doing, we're kind of forcing ourselves. Even the sitcom, the Castellano sitcom, we just didn't know about. It's like writing a play a week, so it's like we had to really figure that out. But Fernwood Tonight was just a talk show, a takeoff with a very specific bent, where it was like a 2-tiered thing, where there's some people believing it's a real show, some people realizing that it's a spoof. So even with the audience, they bring in like an older audience who kind of take it at face value, and then a younger portion of the audience would see that we were doing bits. But we would, for example, we had one bit we did was a guy played by a guy who played Gopher on The Love Boat, Fred
Grande.
Yeah, Fred Grande. He played a doctor. We had just read about it, that marijuana is like a good treatment for glaucoma. We read that in the paper, so we said, "Oh, how about if he's a guy? He comes on as like a legitimate doctor. That turns out he's basically a drug dealer. Does a very serious setup about how yes, it relieves the pressure and all this stuff. And then he says, eventually, he said, "I realized that your entire band has glaucoma." We had the little Happy Kind and the Mirth Makers of the band on the show. They were all stoned. So then, kind of as you go along, you see this guy's just basically a dope dealer. And that's the sort of stuff we did. That's kind of the main material on the show. And Mull and Willard, nobody better. If nobody's familiar with it, it's on YouTube a lot. Find it on YouTube. But it was basically an offshoot of Mary Hartman, where Barth Gimbel is like, I don't know if he had been a big talk show guy before, but now he's in this small town called Fernwood, Ohio, and there's like TV trays for instead of a desk, very sparse. And he would open the show with a big monologue, and now which I think Harry Shearer mainly wrote. Martin would always say that it was ad lib, but it wasn't really ad lib. That show was not. I mean, maybe some elements kind of went off script, but mostly well scripted show. And then Fred would chime in with stuff. I mean, it was just genius stuff. I became really good friends with Fred. And whenever we could, we'd hire Fred bits on other shows. It was just a brilliant thing. I mean, and Norman was never much around. Norman Lear. I mean, a horrible time on a show called One Day at a Time about a year before we started working on Fernwood. So it's such a relief to be on Fernwood and not on One Day at a Time. There's a lot of other characters that would come on regularly. And weirdly enough, Alan Thicke was the head writer, Canadian guy. I mean, he, father Robin Thicke.
Right.
I don't know. He really organized it well. I mean, it was like on every night. I mean, obviously we pre-taped the show. It was a lot of work. They would shoot a couple of shows a day, I think, but we were constantly churning out. There were several other writers just churning out the bits. And then they had weird guests would come on, and it was great. It was really a fun show. And then it became America Tonight because it was a syndicated show. Fernwood was a syndicated show. So it became America Tonight because the stations wanted more celebrities on the show. I guess Norman Lear's company's thinking was they would move the show to a small town in California near Los Angeles. So you could believe that some celebrities might come through there or be willing to go down to this small town to be a guest on the show. Steve Garvey was on, the baseball player, and Fred starts giving him batting tips. I mean, it was just like some wacky stuff. And Carol Burnett was a guest. I forget what her bit was. The celebrities all had bits that they would do, part of the show. And I remember she came into our office, like, this is right after the Carol Burnett show ended. We were on 1 year and she decided to pull a plug. And everybody's kind of annoyed, including me. But then a couple of weeks after, right after the Burnett show, we had been working at Fernwood Tonight early in the Burnett show, just on the side. After the Burnett show, and we were working on America Tonight. And she came into our office and she was like, "Oh, you guys weren't out of work very long." So, so she was a guest on the show. That show was nominated for an Emmy based on her episode. That's the way they would do it. Oddly enough, we had been also nominated. The writing staff of the Burnett show was nominated based on an episode starring Steve Martin and Betty White, the Steve Martin connection. So we were up against ourselves, in 3 other shows. So we won it, the writing staff won it for the Carol Burnett show, beating out America Tonight.
You beating out you. How was the 1 year you were on the Carol Burnett show? What was that?
Well, that was amazing. Again, the fix was in because Ovitz was like a greatest agent. We were so lucky, man. He's the greatest agent ever. He obviously knew Joe Hamilton, who was Burnett's husband and kind of the executive producer of the show. They basically pretty much said, "Yeah, come on down." And so we worked on he had some little project about English as a second language class, kind of helped him with that. This is before the Burnett show started. The Burnett show itself started into production a little bit after that. And Ed Simmons, who had been Norman Lear's partner back in the day, was the head writer. We were young guys. I mean, and I was kind of cocky, but Ed was kind of, thought we were too big for our britches or something. I don't know. But, we were on there with, I think they might have had a whole new staff of writers. I don't remember exactly how many of these people had been there before. Gene Perrette and Bill Richmond, they became really good friends. Liz Sage and Rick Hawkins, and some good people. And our really good friends, Dick Clare and Jenna McMahon, they wrote those long family sketches, which then they spun off into Mama's Family. So at first we were kind of having trouble getting going there. And so Bill Richmond, who was like the father figure to us at that time, Richmond wrote a lot of those early old Jerry Lewis movies. So he sat us down basically at some restaurant across the street and was telling us, you got to get it together or this or that, but we definitely got the message and we refocused. And so we became kind of Ed Simmons became very fond of us finally, but we would basically write a sketch a day or a week. It was like not a real smooth show to do because there was always a lot of music and dancing and stuff. So they took up a lot of time, which Ed was happy about. And if there was a Mama's Family episode, a sketch that would take 20 minutes. Ed was happy about that. So we'd write these little sketches, maybe one per day, or we would get folded into the, that week's show. Ed had a kind of a well-organized system. We were working with Tim Conway, and weirdly enough, Dick Van Dyke had taken over for Harvey Korman. So he was like Carol and Vicki Lawrence and Tim Conway and Dick Van Dyke were like the main core. And Van Dyke really did some brilliant stuff on the show. He replicated the Singing in the Rain dance, a lot of great stuff. And Tim Conway was just the greatest guy. He would come around the office and we'd just have a great old laugh. His job, he made it, and he made every effort to crack up the other actors on these sketches. So he was pretty much deliberately doing that. So they try and hold it in, and a lot of times they couldn't. Yeah, it was a fun show. We were there like 9 to 5. It was like so funny. Somebody told Carol, "Hey, when I drive home, I don't have to turn my headlights on," And Carol said, "Well, maybe we should start working a little longer." Something like that. I don't know. They would take the sketches and they wouldn't change a thing. I mean, they would not change a thing. It was just
That's awesome.
Amazing experience. They would just make it work. And of course, they'd make it 100 times better than you would think. And there was another Mad Magazine alumnus on the show named Larry Siegel. It was like a real dour, grouchy guy. He did a lot of Mad Magazine sketches. I just remember one time at a rehearsal, Bernadette Peters was on the show, and there was this dance number that she was doing, her song and dance number. It was a joy doing that show. It was really a lot of fun. Carol was great.
Now, you also worked with Mary Tyler Moore.
Yes, there's nobody I haven't encountered. It seems like
this was the Mary Tyler Moore hour, and Michael Keaton was in this.
Yes, Michael. He was a great guy, really funny. The show was kind of weird. It was like, I think they got rid of one cast, a bunch of cast people and writers, and put in a whole new group. It was kind of, they were having problems there. Basically, she was doing Jack Benny, where she has a life of a woman who has this variety show, kind of go in between her life and this variety show. Keaton played a page at the studio where she worked. And I knew his manager, Harry Columbi. He was always pitching him before, and I didn't know who the guy was. And finally met him on this show, and he's hilarious. I don't know how happy Mary was about the whole thing. Probably the show wasn't so great, but we did the best we could.
You did Silver Spoons forever, 5 years.
We had a accountant who also represented David Duclon, who was the executive producer of Silver Spoon. So I think that he helped get us a meeting, and we were kind of like struggling around at that point, like trying to find some work. This was like 82. We had a meeting with Duclon at Universal, and he showed us the pilot for Silver Spoons, which was Ricky Schroder and Joel Higgins played his dad, and Aaron Gray was
Jason
secretary.
Bateman was on that. Yeah.
And Bateman was like his Eddie Haskell friend. It was basically, originally it was like Ricky's father Joel Higgins on the show had a toy company. It's kind of a screwball. And Ricky had been I think he was a long lost son or something like that. But he had been in military school, and he comes to live with Joel, Edward was his name on the show, and as his dad, in this big kind of a mansion. And he was supposed to be the more mature one. So don't know where the hell they thought that was going to go. Kind of to me, it just seemed kind of bland, more kid-oriented show, but Ricky didn't do that much comedy-wise. Joel is a great actor. I mean, he had been in Best of the West. I don't know why the hell they canceled that, but that was a great show just before this. Anyway, that kind of switched. The show went on. Joel became more of a dad, and Ricky became not a screw-up, but he was kind of straight. But he had goofball friends and would get into various problems. Aaron Gray was like his dad's secretary. Originally, Leonard Lightfoot played kind of a lawyer friend, and then he got fired. And then they brought in Franklin to play the lawyer. They hired us. David hired us to do the show. So we were back in business. We went to the meeting with press, with Ricky, and we talk about the show and Ricky would talk about himself and stuff like that. And of course, they would always bring up Fernwood Tonight, something, because they knew we worked on Fernwood Tonight. And so Jason Bateman was excellent. He was like his nemesis, kind of like I said, like an Eddie Haskell. That's how we thought about it, from Eddie Haskell from Leave It to Beaver, kind of this. He'd be very obsequious to adults, but then he'd, have these crazy schemes when they weren't around. I remember we had a meeting with the two mothers, David and Stein, and Ricky's mother and Jason's mother at lunch. I think this was even before the show got into production. I don't remember. It was early on anyway. And so one of the first things that Jason's mother said, oh, wouldn't it be fun if Derek moved into the mansion? And you could see the knives coming out of Ricky Schroder's mother's eyes when she said that. And so almost at that moment, Jason Bateman was doomed from that show, because then everything that he did was like Ricky was jealous of. I mean, he was a great character. So of course he got good lines and bits. And then the audience really loved Jason. I was doing the audience warm-up. I got sucked into doing the audience warm-up because the first warm-up guy was not great. Bob, will you do the warm-up for the second show? We did 2 shows for each. We shot 2 shows, 2 different audiences each episode. So I started doing the audience warm-up. So I would, to kill time in between resets and stuff like that, I would interview Ricky, or I'd interview Jason. Ricky's mother is always in the audience. She couldn't stand that. So she put a stop to that. It evolved eventually that I think early in the second season that Diane, who was Ricky's mother, insisted that Jason's got to go. Obviously, they agreed to it. I mean, the company agreed to it, which was a Norman Lear company, but Norman wasn't really, it wasn't involved in the show, but it was an offshoot of his company. So we said, all right, I mean, what we're going to do, I guess Ricky's the key man kind of thing. Obviously, we agreed to it, but she thought that, like, let's say we were working on show 8, and she thought by show 9, he'd be gone. So then show 9 comes along and the reading, the actors all sitting around the reading, and there's Jason. Diane got almost blew her cork because she thought Jason was going to be gone. The previous show was his last show. So somebody had to mellow her out. I think my partner Stein was on Diane duty. He would talk to her, cool her out and stuff.
So Ricky Schroder's mom had it out for Jason Bateman.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, that probably didn't work out long term for them.
No, it didn't.
Yeah, he's in a different stratosphere now.
Yeah, totally. Than poor Ricky. There would be these petty jealousies like that among Ricky and other kids on the show, and somebody didn't invite him to a party, or it's like the show is like a toy or like a hobby or something, and so it'd be frivolous kind of stuff. Ricky and his mother. There's a studio teacher. They're required. When your kids are under 18, you have to have a teacher, certain number of hours that you can shoot. So sometimes they'd be a little loose with that because we wouldn't be finished exactly at 10. So we maybe have to go to 10:15, little negotiations like that. Or if Ricky had a concert to go to, the teacher would say, no, Ricky's got to go. So it would be not a concert for him. He was going to see a concert of somebody. I don't know. There'd be things like that. They kind of worked the system. I don't know how much of an education poor Ricky got with the studio teacher. That was a little behind the scenes stuff, but it was an okay show. We tried to do some kind of cool stuff, but it was funny for what it was. But it was in the end, it was kind of a vanilla show. There wasn't much you could do. It wasn't going to turn into All in the Family or anything. We tried. Or we tried to make it Leave It to Beaver. We tried to make it more of a Leave It to Beaver kind of show.
You're being too hard on yourself. I have good memories of Silver Spoons. I enjoyed it. I think I remember they had an arcade.
Yeah. And that was from Duclon because he had these big games in his house. So he had a bunch of arcade games in the set. We're speaking to Joel, the dad, being kind of like a kid. And there, of course, the train that came through the living room was a big thing.
Right.
Everybody loved that. I mean, one time we had John Houseman who somehow he agreed to play the grandfather on the show. I remember when Duclon called him up to talk to him about it, and he was very nervous. And I guess he was this imperious guy, but he agreed to do it. I guess anything for $1 from Houseman. It was never mentioned in his obituary or anything. But anyway, I remember one shot of him riding into the train looking very pompous, and it was hilarious. And then another time we had probably an edict from NBC. Why don't you have Pearl Bailey on the show? So we had Pearl Bailey on the show, who is a great person, but really great. But we played it where she had been Joel's nanny or something. I forget the whole backstory we came up with. But anyway, she got on the train and she didn't know how to stop it. So it was going to run away down the track, and Ricky jumped on there and stopped it. I don't know if I ever operated it or not, but some trick to it. But that was a big thing on the show.
There's some good episodes. There's some great. Joel hires Mr. T to be Ricky's bodyguard at school because he's worried about Ricky getting pushed around or bullied or whatever. So there's that. So we had some fun stuff. We had an orangutan on from Barzini. Bobby Barzini had a show in Vegas with all these apes and chimpanzees and stuff. So he had the orangutan who was on the Clint Eastwood movies, like the Any Which Way But Loose stuff. But anyway, this orangutan's on the show. Like it's presumably had run away and Ricky finds him and stuff.
I think that orangutan made its rounds on the different sitcoms.
Probably because he was like he's fairly gentle, but I realized that it was because he had some guy hitting him with a stick, like one of his, not Barzini, but one of the trainers. So that orangutan could kill you with a punch in the head if you weren't careful. But he was pretty gentle and then would follow directions, of course, because he didn't want to get hit. We all got a road trip up to Vegas to see the monkey show.
Well, hey, that makes it worth it.
Yeah.
Bob, you've had an amazing career, an amazing life, so many amazing stories. Thanks for hanging out with me and sharing a bunch of them.
Happy, Jeff. Thanks to you and Paul Lander getting me hooking us up.
I know, right?
Okay, man.
All right, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff.